I want to start by saying I think the past few weeks have been a point of reflection for me. They've been a point of reflection not only for what needs to change in my office, but also a point of reflection of things that need to change with me personally. First, as you know, I've asked for a review of my various office procedures and brought on board experts, including the former chairman of the Federal Election Commission and other attorneys at Jones Day. Although that review is underway, and although we anticipate that I will be filing various clarifying amendments based upon the results of the review, we are making some major changes prospectively. I'm hiring third-party administrators for both the campaign and official office finance functions. This will help ensure compliance, orderly record keeping, and a system of checks and balances within each office. Heading up the official office will be Paul Riddico, who is an attorney and who has handled the MRA, which is the Members Representational Allowance. Those are the official funds. He's handled the MRA functions for over 20 years for several other congressional offices, including the offices of current leadership and committee chairman. On the campaign side, Professional Data Services, which is an Atlanta, Georgia-based compliance firm and has been performing some compliance oversight for our office, but will starting immediately, we will also have PDS perform all accounting functions on the campaign side. Additionally, we have engaged a certified public accountant, Heinold Banward, based here in East Peoria, to review our office procedures, internal controls, and recommend any necessary changes that we should consider. The goal of these efforts is to add an additional layer of oversight. I mentioned that this has been a point of reflection for not only how the office needs to improve, but also me personally. I'm proud of the energy and commitment that I give to the people of the 18th District. I know that most weeks I'm working 7 days to deliver the maximum benefit to the people that I represent. I know that when I take a trip and I post photos online, it can create the misimpression of being out of touch or an image that is not worthy of my constituents. I have tried to balance being a young congressman and doing things differently and more open with maintaining a level of seriousness on the issues of the day. I know some days I have failed at this. As my responsibilities increased in Washington and the size of my district increased from 130 to 205 towns, my effort is to cover reclaiming that thought. As my responsibilities increased in Washington and the size of my district increased from 130 to 205 towns, my efforts to cover and be in all parts of the district have increased. And sometimes this included flying on chartered planes. I recognize that this can come across as out of touch with how most of my constituents live. My goal has always been to serve all areas of my district equally, and I've made it a priority to attend as many events and be available to as many of my friends as neighbors as possible. And that's not just in Peoria, Bloomington, Springfield, or Quincy, but it includes Pittsville, Nauvoo, Mount Sterling, and places like Nebo. I've listened to the feedback from folks in my district and from the team of professionals that I mentioned earlier. I believe you have to earn the trust every day of the voters you represent, and that's exactly what I intend to do. I'm looking forward to a busy week ahead here in the district and focusing my energies on delivering for the fine people of the 18th District. With that, we have to take a couple questions if you have any.
Aaron, you criticized Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. for the same things that people are bringing up against you. Any response to that?
Well, I think that's an unfair comparison, and I'd leave it at that.
Are you rethinking whether or not to continue to use chartered planes to travel back and forth from DC to both political and office-based events? Absolutely.
I mean, I think that's when I talk about how I need to change and how this has been a point of reflection. You know, I have put a premium on trying to show up, try to say yes to as many things, and the reality is This is a perfect point of case example today. We've been in session 4 days, well, 3 days plus the snow day, but and you have one business day to get around. And so, you know, every congressional district gets the same budget allotment, and I've put a premium on showing up, and so I've budgeted accordingly to show up. And sometimes that transportation has included aircraft, but I also get the optics. I get the fact that for a lot of people that seems out of touch and unnecessary, and so without a doubt, you know, I'll be thinking twice about using that mode of transportation, and the result will be we'll have to schedule accordingly and continue to do my best to get to as many places as possible. But I would note it's, you know, the largest geographic district in the state and one of the largest in the country. And so I'm fortunate to live in a great city like Peoria, but I have 204 other towns, and those constituents want to see me, I want to see them. And so quite frankly, that's how why I've chosen that mode of transportation in the past, to get me around efficiently. But as I mentioned, I get the optics, and I understand the concern. So yes.
Aaron, what about the raises for your staff when you're calling for everybody else to cut back in Washington?
Well, look, again, every congressional office is given the same budget allotment, and I'm not sure that the print piece that you're referring to is exactly accurate. He makes a lot of assumptions in there that are not true.
You mentioned a lot of these changes. How do you plan to pay for them? These are top attorneys with Jones Day. Where's the money coming from? Well,
depends on who they're serving. So in other words, the changes that I described on the official side, it's not out of the ordinary to have third-party administrators running your finance functions. And so, as I mentioned, the individual that I'm bringing on board who's going to handle my official duties that will be paid for by official funds out of that budget that I described, that individual does it for members of leadership today, does the similar functions for committee chairmen and other folks in DC. So that's what's appropriate there. On the campaign side, the individuals that I'm bringing in to review the campaign processes and procedures, the former FEC chairman, Jones Day, that will be paid for accordingly from those funds, as well as moving forward, the accounting firms that are brought forward to oversee the accounting functions of the campaign offices will be paid for by that. So,
how long do you anticipate the review of expenses is going to take, and is it only going to cover congressional, or is there any reason for them to be going back into your legislative spending and legislative campaign as well?
No, I can't answer the question on how long. I mean, it's gonna be thorough, and when it's finished, when I know, you'll know, and so, you know, we want to get it right, and we want to make sure that you know, all of the processes and procedures and issues have been looked at. But that's the extent of it.
Aaron, Alex has the last question.
Yeah, really quick, Congressman. As has been reported in the last few weeks, you've reimbursed for certain travel costs, the federal government, et cetera. Is your office, or are you looking at any other potential costs coming out in the coming days or weeks that you might also have to reimburse for? Is there anything other like that that's been reported?
Fair question. So that's part of the review, and at the end of the day, I'm going to listen to the experts that understand the law and the compliance better than I, and whatever they recommend, I will carry out. So if that means filing amendments, in the case of some campaign expenses should have been paid out of different campaign expense, you know, there are different accounts. Those will be done. If it's personal funds, then that will be done as we have. So that's why I brought in the former head of the Federal Election Commission and attorneys who are experts in this, because I want to make sure that this isn't a decision that I'm making on my own, but rather in concert with experts.
Do you believe that this has compromised your effectiveness at all?
You know, Chris, I don't. I think at the end of the day, what my constituents want is for me to be accessible to them. You know, we have two major functions of the job: constituent work, and that continues to be carried on. I've got a talented staff in the district, so whether people have problems with their passport, a foreign adoption, veterans benefits, that's well over half of my job, and that continues, and I stand by the great work that my congressional office does on that. And the other side, representing the positions of my district out in Washington as I cast votes. I think I've done that the past 6 years. I think it's why I've been reelected based on my votes on behalf of the district. And so my ability to carry that message out in Washington, D.C. remains the same. And my goal of representing those same values out in Washington, D.C. in the votes that I cast will remain the same. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.